Hey everyone, it's me, Video President 102. Today we are reading chapter 14 through hopefully the ending of Tomorrow. Roman wondered where they'd failed, because they had failed. They let Patton wither away, and they hadn't done anything until it was too late, and Patton had retreated too far into himself to hear them anymore. Hades, who was taken Deceit to spring them into Hades had taken Deceit to spring them into action. Deceit been the problem at the start. Roma couldn't forgive himself or the others for simply ignoring that they had been clearly happening in front of them. No Patton was suffering because of their blindness, their reluctantness to push too far. Well, they should have pushed until Patton broke, because at least if they broke him their way, they could fix him their way as well. Roman? Virgil's voice was small and fragile, and Roman's anger dissolved. Of course, this moment wasn't about placing blame or getting angry. It was the time for discussion, and for them to offer the help that should have been available from the beginning. Roman, please. Logan and I can't do this on our own. We need you. Patton needs you. How were we supposed to, Verge? Roman wasn't one to give up, especially when he was so desperate to protect his friends, but he couldn't see how. Patton was utterly dependent on those voices. Those two were in his closet. Those two were his closest friends now. It wouldn't be as easy as simply muting what they couldn't hear. Logan hummed and adjusted his glasses. If I may, he began, we need to treat this as an abusive relationship. Patton trusts those two voices more than he trusts us. Therefore, we need to work with them while working against them. Logan, I hate to tell you this, but we can't hear the voices. Logan sucked in a breath to try to stay calm. Roman offered up his hand, knowing from endless hours of research that tactile actions were good to keep anxiety at bay. Virgil dove forward and gripped tightly enough for Roman to wince. Logan frowned, as if he thought it hadn't occurred to him, except it must have been because he was Logan. He thought about everything, every variable and every limitation, and every problem. He couldn't have just missed something so glaringly obvious. Except that maybe he had. Zeus. I said like Zeus. Zeus knew they'd all missed things that were obvious. Patton hadn't been acting right for weeks. He'd been too harsh with Virgil, and he'd been not Patton. They'd just done nothing. They'd just let him slip away. Maybe Virgil was right. Maybe Roman needed to step in. Regardless, the royal said, tiredly rubbing the bridge of his nose with his free hand, Patton is our friend, and we must do something. An intervention of some kind will at least allow us to gauge where Patton's thoughts are. If we allow him to continue down this path, Thomas will suffer greatly. Deceit was not lying about that. Virgil sneered. He's the problem, he asked slowly, and his grip on Roman's hand tightened. If he hadn't shown up, we wouldn't be having this problem. Calm down, Roman muttered quietly. Think about Thomas. Indeed, their host must be quite conflicted currently. With Patton the way he was, Thomas was essentially going without his moral and emotions. And on top of that, the clashing of Virgil, Logan, and Roman himself, as well as the lack of schedule. Thomas must be having a hard time. Roman could only hope that with Patton's absence, their host had gone vacant rather than cruel. They could only count on Deceit to keep him that way. If one of the dark sides heard about this, Roman shivered. Bad things would happen. What if we appear to want to welcome the voices? Roman suggested suddenly, frowning down at the table. If we feign welcome, then Patton may be more comfortable translating what they're saying. Once we figured out what they're whispering to him, we may be able to counter. Roman looked away. The thought of deceiving Patton making his skin itch. He hated that they had to go to such lengths, had become hypocrites to save one of their own. Lying? Were they really any better than Deceit if they pulled this off? He steeled his nerve. All right, he said softly, because yes, they were better than Deceit. They were doing this to help Patton, not to hurt anyone else. And besides, Roman was really good at acting. First thing, then, Virgil said, leaning forward slightly. There was a strained light in his eyes, almost a longing. It was almost as if he was missing someone or something. We need to learn their names. Names? Logan repeated. One of the first things Patton would have done is name them. Virgil met their gazes steadily, a slight flush of color in his cheeks. It clicked in Princey's mind. Of course, Virgil was drawing on his own experiences with Derek. We need to treat these voices as people. People that Patton considers his friends. Directly attacking them would only make Patton defensive. We'll lose him easily. I could take point in the questioning, if you'd like. I feel as though I have the most experience with this. It was true. Even with Roman's encounter with Dallin, Virgil had spent more time familiarizing himself with Derek. They'd been close. Logan, of course, hadn't ever had his own side. The logical was too practical, too logical. He could rationalize anything. Hence, Virgil was the best choice. Roman squeezed Virgil's hand when he noticed the flash of panic in his friend's eyes. Hey, it's okay. Patton will be okay. We're going to do this. We're behind you. Logan slid his hand across the table, and Virgil gripped onto it. Okay, he breathed, clearly soothing the contact with both of them. All right, walk with me through the plan so I know what to ask. Roman let Logan do the talking and focused on asserting himself around the soft point in contact between him and Virgil. Well, wasn't this a mess? 15, if it was just, nope. Patton blinked. He had had no warning when Roman had appeared in his room, grabbed his wrist, and vanished them out to the main table. Neither of them had said a word. Patton had just hummed very quietly as he recognized the slight chocolate smell in the air. It reminded him of cookies and comfort. For once, Patton didn't push the memories away. Virgil and Logan were already sitting at the table, and Roman sat down beside Virgil pretty quickly, leaving Patton to hover at the doorway. They were giving him a choice, he realized. They were allowing him the option to run away. Again. Patton sat. Logan cleared his voice. I wanted to apologize, he said slowly, staring at Patton with a kind of intensity that made the moral side look away. After much thought, it became evident to you that you heard my conversation with Deceit. I wish to explain myself. I don't need you to. Patton was tired. He was tired of lying, the deceiving, the pretending. He was tired of sitting down to a conversation that was strained at his emotions. He was tired of being tired. He just wanted them all to be okay. Deceit does that to you, doesn't he? He said humorously. Manages to twist your words until you say what he wants to hear. He doesn't care who he hurts. Logan sort of stared. Indeed, he said, uncomfortably shifting his glasses. Listen, Virgil said, voice oddly quiet. His face was pale and carefully blank, but his eyes were determined. We were wrong to judge you for your coping strategies. I was hypocritical. I know how much support you can get from unlikely friends. Of course. Virgil was talking about Derek. Patton couldn't help it. The defensive tension melted from his shoulders, and he reached for Virgil's hand. It's okay, he said, voice weak. He hated fighting with Virgil. It always made him feel so guilty. And maybe that wasn't healthy. Virgil gripped his hand tightly, managing a trembling smile. Something wasn't right. Pennon could see a sharp gleam in the anxious side's eyes. I want to know about your new friends. Virgil said quietly, and just like that, the strange light was gone, and Virgil looked remorseful. Pennon frowned slightly. Don't tell them! Deacon breathed to his left. Pennon wanted to protest. Why shouldn't his friends know about them? Why did Pennon have to keep so many secrets from everyone? What happened to honesty? Smile for them, my dear. Dominic urged softly, and Pennon did so without thinking. Virgil's lips thinned. Pennon was sick of this. His life wasn't his own anymore. There were too many people deciding what he could and couldn't do. But he was strong enough to withstand. Pennon knew what he could do. Pennon knew what he could handle, and yet others kept insisting on taking control of his life. Pennon was tired of it. Their names are Declan and Dominic, he said, surprised by how strong his own voice was. There was a snarl on his left ear. They're vocal representations of my repression and my denial. They support me, and though they're a little bit overbearing, I trust them. You shouldn't, Roman blurted, and Virgil glared at him. The royal had a sense to look sheepish. Penn lifted a shoulder. You're allowed your own thoughts, kiddo. I'm not going to shun you for thinking differently of me. He looked back at Virgil, who had that sharp gleam in his eyes again. Something was very wrong. Fine. Penn liked to play games. He could play this one, too. Oh, holy yes! You know how hard it is to let them go once you're a friend. He put on his best sad look. Virgil caved almost immediately. Yeah, he murmured, and his grip on Pennon's hand tightened. Yeah, I know. I didn't want them to go. Pennon let some of his vulnerability shine through, just so that look would disappear off of Virgil's face again, and he could pretend that they were trying to bait him into getting rid of the two people that had never lied to him. I feel like they make me happy. Except that Virgil was looking suspicious now. They were destined to do this, to dance around what they really wanted to say. Forever stained with suspicious minds, with a lingering feeling of doubt. How clever they thought they were being. Pennon almost felt proud that they were pulling this off. Pennon, what sorts of things do they say? There it was. Pennon looked to Roman, who had asked the question. Oh, that was Roman, not Virgil. Okay, whatever. I'm not going back. They tell me not to trust you, he said simply, and Roman recoiled as if he'd been physically struck. They're worried that your actions and words are going to cause me more hurt. They get me to sleep and to eat and to look after me for once. But we need you, too. Anger was blooming, and beautifully dangerous burning flower, unflowering in Pennon's chest. Take. That was all they did, and Pennon couldn't just give anymore. No. He was Adam, and he was sick of being betrayed by Eve. This was his story, his turn to decide what happened. For once, he would choose what to say. I can't trust anyone, can I? Is what he settled on. Penn squeezed his hands into fists and felt frustration surge and mingle with the slowly burning anger in him. His eyes itched, his skin tingled. I can't trust you to do what's right for me. I can't trust the voices because apparently they don't care for me either. Who does that leave me with? Deceit and Remus? Roman inhaled sharply. How dare you? He breathed, eyes blown wide in offense and fury. How dare you throw that in our face, in my face? Our Patton would understand that we are doing what's right by him. We are trying to help, and we're trying to protect Thomas. This hurt that you're drawing on right now is twisting you. Those voices are twisting you, and if you aren't so far in denial, you might be able to see that. Roman! Virgil snapped. Enough! No! Roman leapt to his feet, whirling around to snarl at his fellow's side. I'm tired of having to be delicate. Penn can handle it. After all, he seems intent on not being treated like a child. Penn scoffed, his own anger rising to match Roman's passionate rage. Like you're any better, he said harshly, feeling the lingering horror at what he's becoming slip away like smoke on the wind. This is what those repressed feelings had made him into. All that hurt that had been bottled up, shoved down, and now it was molten lava that set Patton on fire and made him burn. You were so keen to fight your own battles until you lost. You turned tail as soon as Dallin showed up. You were afraid of nothing. I was afraid of disappointing you, Roman shouted back, and yes, those were tears building up in his eyes. If Patton wasn't so angry right now, he'd be crying too. I was so afraid of not doing right by you that I faltered. So did Virgil. So did Logan. You want to be angry, Patton. Fine, but don't you dare turn that anger on us when we have done nothing but love you. The anger had lived in him, erupted, and then there was a short, sharp scream in his right ear before the roar of fire in his veins blocked out sound completely. It was Dominic who screamed. His voice cracking at the rage burned him away, reduced him to ash. You don't know anything! Patton cried, his fury scorching his throat. That glass bottle that had held those bad feelings had completely shattered, and all at once. He was swept away. Years of repressed emotions swamped him and claimed him and drowned him in hot. You don't know what it was like to smile every day, just to make you all happy. God forbid that Patton be unhappy. God forbid that Patton be anything but perfect. God forbid that Patton might be fighting for the right thing. Did any of you think about when fighting Thomas about the wedding? It was up to me. I fought for what was right, and then you made it wrong. You called that love? You called this love? Virgil's voice was ice, and Patton's skin was hot, went numb. Like Logan, the anxious side's anger burned cold, 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 and right now, Patton was burning hot, hot, hot. You choose two strained voices over us without hesitation. Logan was in the middle of figuring out how to help you, and you chose them without a second thought. Pressure built up in Patton's head. They made me feel okay. Did you choose Deceit over us too? Silence, because Patton hadn't he? He let Deceit in, let him warp reality. Patton had chose Deceit over his friends long before his friends had ever had the chance to choose Patton back. I did what I had to survive. Patton forced through his gritted teeth. What were you surviving, Patton? Virgil's voice was ice. It was so cold that Patton burned in a completely different way. What war are you fighting? What sort of battle forced you to choose Deceit and Declan and Dominic over us again and again, until you were so sure you couldn't trust us? What sort of war forced you to push us away when you were so desperately just wanted to help you? The fire was sputtering out now, exhausted by Patton's yelling. Virgil's ice was creeping in, freezing out the rest of the heat. It didn't extinguish all of the lingering hurt, though, and Patton was so tired of hiding it. He turned on Logan, who simply looked at him. What about you? Patton sneered, still needing to lash out, because if he wasn't angry, then he was sad, and he was so damn tired of being sad. Huh? You sat there and you said nothing. You seemed to have plenty to say before all of this, worried you might say something wrong. I think it's a little late for that concern, don't you? Logan just kept looking at him for a steady way. He looked completely unruffled by the fighting. Why aren't you crying? He asked calmly without a hint of anger or accusation. Pam felt his motion sort of stumble. What? Why aren't you crying? You're an emotional being, and you cry when you experience heightened emotions. Why aren't you crying now? Because this isn't happening, Declan sighed. Because you're going to wake up tomorrow and things are going to be just fine. But things wouldn't be just fine. Patton couldn't outrun this. Too much had been said. Too many wounds had been ripped open. Patton wouldn't be able to ignore this anymore. He had to face the fact that this was happening. He had to deal with it. I'm not crying because Declan told me not to, Patton admitted, and it wasn't what he wanted to say, and it was only partly true, but it seemed to be enough for Virgil, who stood up and wrapped Patton in the tightest hug he could manage. Well, I'm telling you now, the anxious side murmured quietly, the ice thawing. Cry, Patton. You don't have to deal with this alone anymore. Patton didn't want to. He wanted to be angry again, because being angry meant being strong, except that anger had gone, had dissolved into nothing, and now Patton felt sort of hollow. Another set of arms settled over his shoulders, and a body pressed against his spine, effectively trapping him in the middle of a tight, almost loving hug he had ever had. I forgive you, Roman promised slowly, voice thick in his own tears. I forgive you, Patton. Now you just have to forgive yourself and everything will be okay. Logan said nothing, but he'd reached out and held Patton's hand. Virgil had made an express noise and tugged on the logical side into the group hug. Damn scaredy cat, he grumbled slightly, and Patton cried. Love, Patton had learned, could be a poison. Loving the wrong person could destroy everything, could tear you apart and break you down, and crush you into dust. Loving the wrong person led to the distrust and lies and sabotage. Loving the wrong person meant reckless self-sacrifice and self-destruct tendency that ended in pain. Loving the right person, though, well, that had its own special kind of magic. Loving the right person brought healing and happiness and hugs tight enough to possibly crack a rib. Virgil was like a cat. He dug his claws in, and when you were struck with them, like it or not, Patton would change nothing. Alana means family! Roman and Virgil yelled at the screen together with the TV cracking up as Logan let out a deep sigh. The four of them were back in Roman's room, draped over each other and curled into the blankets so much that Patton thought it was rather impossible to tell where one of them started and the other one else ended. Patton smiled a small smile and shifted slightly, Virgil subconsciously moving with him so that Patton never lost contact with him. Logan glanced over at him, a gentle question in his eyes. Patton shook his head. Legs asleep, he mouthed. Logan's lips quirked before he turned away. Patton scolded playfully. Traitor. I relate to Stitch, Roman declared loudly, falling back dramatically. The movie had evidently finished. Patton had missed most of it, if he was honest. Virgil shoved the fanciful aside, grinning. You're literally wearing a Stitch onesie. If I didn't know better, I think you were infatuated. Roman wrinkled his nose. I didn't relate to him like that. All of them, Patton and Logan included, laughed. They settled in for Brave, Virgil snuggling deeper into his bat onesie, and Patton inhaled deeply. He felt lighter, like his body was his own again. Dominic and Declan had gone, that he knew for sure, and he never felt better. He and Logan had sat down after Patton's tears had dried and talked through everything. Logan had explained. Patton had cried again. And they'd been okay. Logan had explained that Dominic had likely been the first to go. The sudden release of Patton's ignored negative emotions would have destroyed him immediately, because repression didn't need to be around if Patton was repressing anything anymore. Declan had hung on. It hadn't been until Virgil had confessed quietly that it would take time for them all to heal, and Patton had believed him. He wouldn't wake up tomorrow feeling okay. Had been pretty quick after that. It hadn't taken them time. There was days where Patton hadn't come out of his room. There were still times where Virgil tensed up if Patton moved too sharply, said something too loudly, got too defensive. It would take them all time to drag themselves back to what they were, and maybe they wouldn't completely fix what they'd broken. After all, you couldn't remove all the marks from a scratched-up paper. They would, however, slide right back into easy trust. Penn would say things without thinking, and he would automatically try to eliminate any possible negative repercussions. Virgil stopped carrying unrealistic expectations about Patton's attention. Roman stopped trying to hold them all together and just let them figure it out for themselves. It was a bad thing because it helped them grow on their own. Logan, though, didn't change much. When Patton asked him why he didn't seem to be affected, he shrugged and said, "I always knew we could help you." Holding on to that certain knowledge eliminated any possible negative aspect of change. I simply think that we will continue to grow closer as a unit. Thomas will be better for it. Patton knew that the logical side's way of saying, "I believe in you." But there was something else Patton hadn't managed to track down, and maybe Patton needed to dig his heels in it and insist they talk. After all, Deceit had been a sincere piece of the whole deblaze. With a murmured explanation in Virgil's ear and a nod from Logan, Patton slipped out of the group pile and walked out the door. He felt a pull in his stomach moments later, warning that someone was in his room. He had a good feeling he knew who it was, too. "I think we finally had a talk," he said quietly, and Deceit didn't startle. The devious side was sitting on Patton's bed, staring at his hands with a strange look on his face. Patton felt his heart ache for the side, recognizing the same lost look Virgil had held onto for so long before they'd really started to understand and accept him. He looked up at him slowly, looking nervous. "No lies," he said first, almost desperately. Patton nodded and pursed lips, subtly moving further and further into Deceit's space. It was a trick he'd perfected with Virgil. Sure enough, some of the tension bled from Deceit's shoulders. "How could you forgive me after all I've done?" Patton considered the question for a moment and decided to answer with a story. When Virgil first became a side, I was terrified," he said lightly, settling on the bed. He didn't reach for Deceit. Not yet. "I couldn't combat the energies he was giving off. I went with it, because I like to avoid conflict. He kept pushing Thomas, kept pushing us. I didn't understand him. Why I couldn't he see what he was doing to our host." Deceit flinched. It took me a long time to figure out that he just as scared as I was." Patton kept his voice soft, because Deceit had tensed up again. Patton needed the other side to know that he understood that he'd gone through this with Virgil. Deceit didn't need to be scared of them. He hid behind his name and his purpose. We let him do that, and then we shunned him for it. I've not quite forgiven myself for that." Deceit took a new shaky breath. Patton let him be, let him collect his thoughts. Deceit started slowly. "I think I want." Patton reached a hand across because he knew what Deceit wanted, and he knew how long it would be to take the side to say it. "We'll be ready," he promised, and Deceit took his hand. "Whenever you decide you want to join us, we'll be waiting with open arms." That was incredible. Like, like, Patton was over here, like, "We accepted a Virgil, we're gonna accept you too, Deceit." But this was before Remus, so he's like, wait, there's, like, what about the other dark sides? Like, are all the dark sides just gonna slowly come over one by one, and we're just all gonna be like, ah? Hold on. We are officially done with the book. Oh my gosh. That ending was so superb. Like, I read this once before, like, quite a while back, and I couldn't understand it because I just couldn't understand it for some reason. But reading it out loud really helped me understand the story. Like, I understand the first 3 books. I couldn't understand Patton's story. But after reading it out loud, it helped me, like, understand, like, oh my god. It was especially hard to, like, voice act at the end because I, like, kind of started crying and just all amazeballs. So, now to discuss what we're going to do next. The next book, as you see here, is Bad Moon Rising. She's only posted the first 3 chapters. I could probably read that tomorrow or later today. But it's going to take a while for her to post each chapter. I don't like reading one chapter at a time. So, like, I should wait till there's, like, 3 chapters up and read. But here's the thing. That's going to take a long time. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read another book series called No. Well, the first book is called No, the second book is called Maybe, and the last book is called Yes. It's the cutest story, and it made me cry multiple times. And it's really long, so it's going to last a long time, plus it's already finished, so we don't need to wait for, like, a 4th book or whatever. It's, like, completely finished. So, until we either do Bad Moon Rising or No, do your best.